Hi, my name is Sophie Pfeffer, and this is the first interaction for our GLP project. So I met with two girls on my floor who ended up both going to the same high school in China, and I didn't really know what I was expecting them to tell me when I asked them about what school was like for them, but it definitely was not what they actually told me. So for them, they have school from 7 a.m. to 9 p.m., and that just absolutely blew my mind. I kept telling them that because, to me that's just crazy, especially going to school from 7:20 to 2:10, 7 a.m. to 9 p.m. I thought was absolutely insane. I thought it was really interesting that they had an hour lunch period, because for me I only had a 20-minute period and it was just to eat lunch and go back to class. But for them, they could go to restaurants. They lived close enough to their houses so they could go home and eat. I also thought it was really interesting that they had a nap time period, so they could take a nap in the middle of the day, which I thought was really helpful for their part, because if they're going to school for pretty much 14 hours, they definitely need a nap or else they're going to fall asleep in class. They also didn't really have a lot of time to do extracurricular activities, since they were in school for 14 hours, and so they did have a 40-minute gym class. But one thing I thought was really interesting was they told me that if they had a big exam in one of their classes, that teacher could cancel their free gym time so that they would go to class and continue studying, which I thought was interesting that they gave teachers that type of power, because that's definitely not how it works here. The main thing they were worried about were their exams to get into high school and then exams to get into college. I didn't even know that in China you tested into high schools. I thought that was pretty interesting and didn't really make a lot of sense to me. But those exams were really hard, and then obviously getting into college was harder for them. They were basically an SAT, ACT type exam, but way, way more strict. They told me that everyone took the exam on the same day, unlike here where you could take it at different times throughout the year, and that when you go into the building they'd have military people surrounding the building, and I thought that was pretty intense. And if they were had to leave to go to the bathroom, they get patted down to make sure they weren't cheating. I thought that was pretty interesting, because it shows that China really, really takes their education seriously compared to America, and I don't know if that's a good thing or a bad thing. But I thought that was pretty intense and would definitely stress me out, as much as it stressed them out. They also told me that for that exam, you had to apply to college before you took the exam. So you had to guess what you would get on the exam and then figure out what schools you would be able to get into, which I thought was kind of unfair, because you could study and then get something lower than what you thought, and if you apply to schools that don't accept that grade, then you weren't going to be able to get in. So I thought that was kind of weird that they did it backwards, instead of how here you take the exam and then you apply for school, and if you don't have high enough on something, you could retake the exam, where they can't retake it, they have one shot. To study for those exams, they pretty much would just so for them, high school was 3 years. The first 2 years were learning new material, and then the last year was a review of all the material they've learned in the 12 years of school, so since they first started going to school, which also it was really intense. And they said that on Saturdays the school would be open and kids could go in and study on Saturdays, and I was whoa, that's a lot. The main thing that made them happy about school was that even though they were in school for such a long time, they ended up for those 3 years being in all the same classes with the same 16 kids. So for my high school, it would we'd have classes at the same time, but you might not have someone you know in that class, a friend, so it was really exciting. But for them, they kind of became a little family for those 3 years, because they had class with all the same kids. And so even though they were there, they were still spending time with their friends and hanging out with them.